Tranquility du Jour, December 17th, 2018. Looking for a tranquility reset? Trade in a week of winter for a week of sunshine, coconut water fresh from coconuts, amazing food, yoga, creativity, mindfulness, and self-care with me in beautiful Costa Rica. And this is happening over President's Day weekend, so those of you who are stateside and get that day off, you just need to take 4 days off for a 7-day vacation. You can learn more at KimberlyWilson.com/Costa Rica. Hello there, this is Kimberly Wilson, and welcome to the 437th edition of Tranquility du Jour, a podcast featuring authors, artists, and activists making a difference around the globe. Today, we're chatting with the amazing author and friend, Beth Howard. So we're going to chat about moving abroad for love, the challenges of a brand new country where you do not speak the language, living in the American Gothic House, the practice of writing, and the power of pie. So before we dive into the interview with Beth, I wanted to remind everyone, if you are new to Tranquility du Jour, you can find out more in the show notes, which can be found at KimberlyWilson.com/437. And then also, if you would like to receive a little love note in your inbox ever so often, about 2 times a month, and get access to a library filled with all sorts of tranquility resources such as MP3s, PDFs, videos, etc. You can sign up for my love notes, and that can be found at KimberlyWilson.com/love notes. Again, there is a link to this in the show notes. Also, for those of you who have been curious about what was going to be next for me, I have decided to pull together the Year Tranquility program that I've been releasing all year long and combine it with the playbook, which is something I produced last year that is basically the day book but without all the weekly layouts. So what that means is it has a lot about wellness, capsule wardrobe, recipes. I'm including crispy cauliflower this season, and then also start and stop lists, year's dreams, the monthly layout. So kind of a book around the big picture of really living a year of tranquility. And then deep diving into topics ranging from creativity to self-care to mindfulness to yoga to dreams to love. Anyway, so this will be available for pre-sale on Amazon within the next couple of weeks, and more to come on that. But I just wanted to let you know that that is what is happening. And I wanted to say again a big thank you to everyone who took time to fill out the survey of what they wanted. And I will be creating a new program around this book. So stay tuned on that. Right now, we're deep in the editing process of the book and then the layout process with my fabulous local graphic designer. So more to come there. But again, I just wanted to update you and say a big thank you. Also, for those of you who have and are familiar with my writing, I would be so grateful if you took a moment to pen a review on Amazon or Goodreads. My hope is that it helps other people find more tranquility in their lives. Also, a few things that are coming up. New Year's mini retreat in Washington, D.C. at Yoga Works, formerly Tranquil Space. That's happening on New Year's Eve from 2 to 5. In my office, the following day, I'm doing a New Year's salon. And there are 4 spots left for this, and we'll be doing all sorts of fun practices from reflection to intention setting to laying out and creating a vision board, an inspiration board of sorts for the brand new year. Free online event happening January 6th. And then there's much more in the show notes, along with a writing salon, a 4-week Tranquility Salon that starts on the 13th. Again, those are all in DC. And then 2 upcoming retreats, Tranquility in the Tropics, February 16th through 23rd over President's Day, and Tranquility in Tuscany, July 13th through the 20th. Beth Howard is an author, blogger, and radio commentator. She is known for being the former resident of the American Gothic House, where from 2010 to 2014, she ran the Pitchfork Pie Stand. Her books include Making Peace, a Memoir of Love, Loss, and Pie, Ms. American Pie, Buttery, Good Pie Recipes, and Bold Tales from the American Gothic House, and her latest memoir, Hausfrau Honeymoon, Love, Language, and Other Misadventures in Germany. She's written for the New York Times, Real Simple, Country Living, and many other publications. She's been featured on CNN, CBS This Morning, BBC, and NPR. She's also given a TED Talk about the healing powers of pie. She blogs at The World Needs More Pie. You can find this and more in the show notes. Welcome, Beth.
Hi, how are you, Kimberly?
I'm good, thank you. Delighted to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
Well, congrats on your brand new book, Hausfrau Honeymoon, Love, Language, and Other Misadventures in Germany.
I know, right? It pretty much tells you everything you need to know right in the title.
Exactly. And so tell us a bit about your background. Like, I know you live on a farm in Iowa, and what led you to write this latest book? This is your third book. So, Hausfrau Honeymoon.
Well, it's actually my third book. Well, it's my third book published, but it's my first book I ever wrote. That's why I'm so proud of getting this thing out into the world finally. So I wrote this book 12 years ago, and I had written another manuscript that would have been, I think, my third book, except that it's sitting on the desk of some publisher in New York, and it's just been sitting there. And I'm like, well, what can I do while that's being looked at and read, and while I'm waiting, and there's advice given to authors to say, will you start on the next book? And I'm like, I'm not starting a new book right now. I just finished one. So I thought, well, I have this old manuscript in my files. And so I pulled it out and read it again. And I was like, hey, you know what? It's time to publish this thing. So that's how it came to be. It was just something to do while I was waiting for another book to make it out into the world. And, this is a thing. I self-published this book, whereas, the other ones have traditionally published, and this is so fast. You can get the book out there right away, and you get to pick your own cover, and I hired an editor, and it's just like, that's been a really empowering experience. And it's just been so fun because I got it out there so fast. I mean, relatively fast. I wrote the book 12 years ago. So you could say it took 12 years to get it published, but it's out there now. It was basically like a 3-month process by the time I had picked it up again and read through it, and then decided, yeah, I'm going to publish this. So it was like 3 months from that moment until the time it went out into the world.
That's amazing, right? Because there's no way to do that with a publisher.
Right, exactly. And the quality has improved so much in self-publishing that you can't even tell that it's self-published. And I also like the idea that they don't have to cut down as many trees, because they don't print thousands of them at a time. When you self-publish, it's print on demand. And I really think that's a great environmentally sound concept. You don't have all these printed books that are just wasting away in a warehouse and using up paper and resources. So I like that part about self-publishing as well.
Right, because back in the old days with self-publishing, you would have a garage full of boxes of books, right? And now it's the on-demand. It's so fabulous.
Right. I've even seen you can walk into a bookstore, at least this was a few years ago in New York City, but there was a book printing thing in the middle of the bookstore. Like you could print your book on demand right there in the store. It's like, oh, that'll be something in the future. You just like a vending machine or something that has like a book printer built in. I don't know. It's just, it's amazing how things are advancing though. And I think it's really empowering for the author to be able to get their words out there.
Absolutely. And to then find yourself on Amazon or in bookstores and things along those lines. So, talking about the book with regard to this, I'm curious, so what led you to Germany?
Love. What else drives you to do things that you would never do in your wildest dreams, like move to Germany? So I I fell in love with a German, and I met him when I was on a road trip to Oregon, and he had been assigned to a work project in Portland for 3 months, and we crossed paths at Crater Lake National Park. And I mean, we talked maybe 15 minutes in the Crater Lake Lodge lobby, and I just thought, well, I'm just going to give him my card. He's very handsome, and it was really nice talking to him. But yeah, I had to go, and he had to go, and so we couldn't continue the conversation. And then we managed to meet up again when I was over in Europe for a friend's wedding in Italy, and then our romance just snowballed from there. And then the beauty of it was that his job kept bringing him over to the west coast of the US where I was living. So we got to see a lot of each other over an 18-month period. And then I was working on a project that ended, and we decided that at that point I would move over to Germany so we could be together and that we would get married. And so that's how I ended up in Germany. It's sort of a long way of answering that, but it was, a love story, and Germany didn't seem like a difficult place to live. I had visited there so many times, with him. So when we were dating, it just seemed like a great place. No, how hard could it be? And his friends were very nice, and we always went out for nice dinners. But living there was not like visiting. Living there was a whole different experience, and I had to learn the language, number one, and that proved to be a very, very difficult, if not impossible task, because I still panic to this day if I have to speak German. It's just something that does not come naturally to me. French is a whole other story, and Spanish. Like, I love speaking French, but German, not so much.
Yeah, well, that leads me to my next question of what were your biggest surprises about living in Germany? Like, I love how you even talk about the bottles and how they go on the little belt at the grocery store.
Right. So grocery shopping over there is very different. Like, you have to weigh all your fruit and put the sticker on your bag yourself and before you get up to the checkout. So, and if you don't, look out. And the wine bottles and any glass bottles, they want you to lay them down on the conveyor belt. And if you don't, my experience was that they don't ask you nicely, ma'am, could you please lay your bottles down? Instead, you get like this public humiliation, this reprimand, shouting, and all in German. And it's the most terrifying thing. And it's just like, I'm just trying to buy some groceries, but I would go home in tears. More than once I went home in tears just from being out running regular errands because I didn't know how things worked, and people were just really gruff about trying to explain it to me. It's like, I'm not used to that, and I didn't want to get used to it. When I would tell my husband that, how can you stand that when people aren't that warm and friendly to each other? And he's like, I'm just used to it. I'm like, well, that's not the way I like living my life. I don't want to get used to it. So that was definitely the biggest obstacle. Really was just the brusqueness, I would say, the directness, let's say. Maybe that's a little bit more polite to say, just, rather brusque, direct personality.
Yeah, because it makes me think, even going to Paris or Spain or Italy, and you go to a grocery store, and how, things are always just a little different. And if you don't speak the language, and, or do you have to buy a bag? Did you bring your bag? All these sorts of things. And I just try to watch the people in front of me and around me so that I don't do the wrong thing, but it's not easy. And it helps us, I think, become a little bit more accepting whenever we have people in the States even fumbling about, not sure what to do.
That is the biggest takeaway from my experience living overseas, be it Germany or any other country. But, it gives you a much bigger appreciation for the people who live in America who don't speak the language or who aren't familiar with our customs. It definitely makes me more patient and more, I don't want to say tolerant, more compassionate, for people who aren't used to being here. And because I've been on the other side, and it's hard. And I try to speak more slowly and clearly for people so they can understand my English if they're not native English speakers, for one thing. But yeah, kindness and just, being welcoming and warm to people. That's how I want to be with people from other countries. But it's not always reciprocated. Other cultures, aren't. But there were also really lovely, warm people in Germany. It's just, sometimes the clerks at the grocery store. I don't know. I don't know what their personal stories are. Everyone's got something going on in their life. What's that Facebook meme that goes around? Be kind, for you never know what battles other people are fighting. Right. So, I try to remember that, but I was just scared all the time because it's scary to not be able to understand the language and to be able to communicate. And I'm a communicator, so I was like totally cut off. That part was really challenging.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then also the reprimanding. I mean, it's so hard to be scolded, much less publicly.
Is it like that in Paris? I mean, you spend a lot of time in France. Is it, did you have similar experiences in France?
It's funny. A lot of people will say, oh, French people are rude or what have you. And I could see how things could be interpreted that way, but it's never really been my experience other than, sometimes being like, oh, well, can you leave the ham off? No. Can you put it on the side? No. Oh, okay, then I get something else. We're just things like that where you're like, really? There's no flexibility. But right. I have to tell you, my most recent trip, I was there and I would order pizza without cheese and there was no issue with it. So I feel like either times are changing or I'm getting different waiters. But, yeah, I could see how things could be interpreted that way in France or really anywhere where you're just like, oh, that's not how they do things here. But I think particularly living there where you're exposed to it daily, it would take a toll.
Right. But I do think things are changing a little bit too. Just, following your point that, for example, when I was there 12 years ago, you did not order coffee to go. You barely ordered anything to go. You would never see people walking on the street holding a coffee cup. like I would walk the dog in the mornings over there with my coffee cup, shuffling along the bike path, but nobody else would do such a thing. But now Starbucks is over there and now they've really gotten a little bit more used to that, coffee culture thing that we started, taking your cup to go. So that's just little interesting, small, tiny little things. But I do think some things are changing.
Absolutely. And, I have to say that's one thing that I always appreciate about, I would say Europe in general, is people go to the cafe, they sit, they have what is it you drink in those tiny cups? Is it espresso that people drink?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, they'll drink their little espresso and, they sit there, they have an experience versus us, we're always like getting things to go, running around, drinking it. And I'm like, who is experiencing it better? Now, granted, that person may have a bit more time than the other person who gets it to go. But, sipping things on the go is such a different experience than sitting at a cafe, people watching, reading like physical books. It's like this really, there's a culture of almost like leisure and experience that I feel like we're a bit more about to-go-ness.
Right. And that is one of my big takeaways also from living in Germany. People ask me, well, what did you like best about it? Or what did you appreciate most about it? And I would say, their sense of time, they're a little bit more, the leisure, the taking longer to have a meal. You don't get rushed at a restaurant. There's a chapter in my Hausfrau Honeymoon book about, I'm back in LA visiting and I'm having dinner with a friend in Santa Monica and it was an expensive place. And the waiter is like rushing us out of there. He drops the check without asking if we want dessert. And we did want dessert, by the way, and it's like, that would never happen in Germany. They just let you sit there as long as you want and really enjoy your meal. There's no rushing you out the door and the people aren't working for tips either. So that does change things. It changes the whole mood of the dining experience. So, yeah, I was like, hey, I don't really like that about the U.S. There's some things that I learned that I really prefer the European way.
Yeah, it's like you pretty much have to beg for your check, You have to track the person down, sometimes remind them. Then they come and you're like, oh, I have a card. Oh, then they got to go back and get the machine. And you're like, oh, my God, it's such an experience. Yeah, you got to set aside a lot of time for dining.
But that's because they're not home watching TV.
Right.
Right? So that is the entertainment.
Well, and so that leads me to my next question really is, so what are some of the highlights? So, kind of takeaways from the experience, because it does sound like there were some positives, right? Like that you learned and that you've probably taken into your everyday life since then.
Well, I mean, just in terms of how it affects me in everyday life, it's mostly like when I listen to the news, I just have a very distinct reference to what they're talking about. I might know the actual place. I might have been there, or, I have a lot better understanding of world events in European events when I listen to the news, just from having lived there. But some of the things you can't bring back with you, but I wish I could, like they have mineral baths, day spas all over Germany. And that was, for your audience who's probably into well-being, that's like one of the greatest things about Germany. They have these spas and saunas, and in Stuttgart, where I lived, they've got these mineral water pools that you can swim in, and just like effervescent water. It's all bubbling up from the earth, and that is just incredible. This sort of taking care of your body. And when they soak and they sit in the saunas, and they have a ritual where the sauna master comes in, and they have different, what they call pourings, and they use aromatherapy, and the sauna master comes in and he pours his aromatherapy scent onto the hot rocks, and along with some water, and everything just goes steaming up, and you get this surge of heat, and he waves the hot air around, and it's just like you breathe deep, and then you go jump into some freezing cold pool afterward. And it's very sensuous, So for all the rigidity of the people and how uptight they can seem, they are also very sensuous people. And they have these spas are all over. And it's just really nice experience, especially in the winter when it's cold. You just go in there and you get so warm to the bone.
It sounds like the hammams almost, the hammam experience in France.
Very similar to that. I've been to a hammam in Paris, and but this is definitely more of the water experience, and the saunas are the wood saunas, so there's no marble slabs. Some of them might have a few, but yeah, I like that kind of stuff over there. I liked being close to France and Italy. That was a good part about Germany. And my husband had a motorcycle, and he had it outfitted with the panniers, and we had the gear. So we went on some really fun excursions across the Alps into Italy. We rode the motorcycle to Venice, Italy, and the Alsace region of France, which is wine country. So yeah, those were some amazing things.
Well, and what do you hope readers will take away from reading your book?
Because I struggled so much being in Germany, it became sort of detrimental to my own personal well-being. And, I loved my husband, but I also needed to take care of myself. And so I didn't stay. I came back to the US without him, and we did still go back and forth. And ultimately he did move to the US. So that was like the big happy ending. Not to give away the spoiler alert here, but putting yourself, I don't want to say putting yourself first, but taking care of yourself, knowing that if something isn't good for you, then it's okay to say that it's not working, and then do what's right for you. So it's a little bit of like an empowerment book I would say for women, like especially for women who might be in a bad relationship that are afraid to leave. It's like, I loved him, but I still left because I needed to take care of myself.
Well, and that's something that you write in the epilogue. You say, while I learned the value of maintaining discipline to plow through difficult situations, I also learned the importance of self-preservation.
Mm-hmm. I would say that's something that hopefully this book will help people in a situation that maybe they go, okay, well, this gives me a little more courage to change my circumstances so that it's healthier for me. Because, if it becomes unhealthy, that's, love is not enough sometimes. And it did work out okay. He did finally, I had agreed to live there only for 2 years. That's the kicker there. And then it became 3 years, and then it became 4 years. And then I was like, no, I can't do this anymore. So I even found a therapist over there. And then the therapist told me after our session that she wanted to leave Germany. And I'm like, that's not helping any. I was like, I'm coming to you to try to figure out how I can stay here and be more comfortable here. But she was like, no, I want to leave. And I'm like, oh my God, what therapist tells you that? Yeah, you should read that chapter.
I
Kimberly.
did. Totally,
like therapy 101. It's like she would fail. So yeah.
Yeah, because didn't she was moving to Seattle, is that right?
She wanted to.
Yeah, she wanted to. Yeah. You're like, oh.
He's the therapist here, and you were me. Oh.
Well, what would you say, like, if you could tell your 40-year-old self something, about this experience to just, to be able to go back and talk to that part of yourself, what do you think you would want her to know, your 40-year-old self?
Well, I think about that a lot, actually. Like, mainly, how could I have done it differently? And I think I mentioned that too in the epilogue. It's like, I would, if I had it to do over again, would I do it? Yes, I would. Of course I would, because I always want to try something new and take a chance. I'm very much about taking risks, and like, you don't know how it's going to go until you try it, right? So you might as well try it. You can always move back. And, I don't know how I would have done it differently. I might have tried to arrange a different kind of work situation that I had maybe work straight off the bat, or I don't know, somehow just take the pressure off of myself to not be so worried about learning the language. But that was really my biggest obstacle, more so even than the culture itself, was just not being able to speak. So honestly, I don't know what I could have done differently. I had already been taking German classes in Seattle before I moved over to Germany. So, I feel like I did all the right things. And I would just say, just be prepared for the challenge and don't be too hard on yourself. Don't force yourself to stay there longer than is comfortable for you. Or, I don't know. I'm still stumped on that one. What could I tell my 40-year-old self? Like, it's going to be hard, but do it. Go for it anyway. You won't regret it. And even though it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done, you won't regret it.
Beautiful. I think that's a great reminder that you do touch on beautifully in the epilogue. And of course, Beth, you've written 2 other books, Making Peace and The American Pie. So can you tell us a little bit about these 2?
Well, again, spoiler alert, my husband ended up dying at the age of 43 of a ruptured aorta. So unexpectedly and suddenly, and I was thrust into a grief so deep. I just didn't even know what hit me. And I had been making pie as a salve to a very difficult .com job where I was working as a web producer 80 hours a week. And I just finally quit that job. And I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm behind the computer all the time. I need to go do something with my hands, something tactile, something that engages all my senses. So I joked when I quit and said, I'm going to go make pie. Well, that's what I ended up doing. I worked at a gourmet cafe in Malibu, and I made pies. And so that became this thing that I did. And I had a pie blog. And so then when my husband died, what I realized is that pie was this thing of, comfort food, and that it brings people joy when you bake a pie and share it with other people. And so pie became this vehicle for healing my grief. And that's what Making Peace is about. It's about going around and making pies and giving pies away, teaching other people how to make pie. And how this journey of looking for pie stories led me back to my native Iowa, where I volunteered to be a pie judge at the Iowa State Fair. And I went to visit my birthplace afterward and stumbled upon a house for rent. And that changed the entire course of my life. So, that book starts out, I blame pie. If I hadn't, I was born because of pie. And if that hadn't happened, then I, would have never met my husband, and then I never would have to suffer through this grief, that he died. So it's all pie's fault, because my parents got married because my mom made my dad his favorite banana cream pie, and he proposed right after eating the first bite. so pie features very strongly in my life. So yeah, so that's my memoir, Making Peace. That was my first published book, and then that led to a cookbook called Ms. American Pie, and that's 80 pie recipes. And they're not all my own. They're pie recipes from the woman I worked for in Malibu, that pie baking job after the .com. and recipes that I gathered from friends and people who won first place at the Iowa State Fair. They let me use their recipes. So yeah, that's kind of a nice collection. And it's a book that helps people. It takes the fear out of making pie and encourages people to just make it. Even if it doesn't turn out perfectly, people will still really appreciate it. And also the importance of the hands-on tactile experience that, you're putting in some invisible ingredient that I would call love. So I think that's an important part of pie making.
Well, and you even did a TEDx talk about pie. So tell us about that.
Yeah, that was, first of all, I was scared out of my mind doing a TEDx talk because I tell you, you're not supposed to use notes. And I didn't know what I was doing, but I was so scared. But my mouth was so dry and, you don't get to do it over and then it's recorded and then it lives out there on the internet. So that was terrifying. But my message was basically the same message that I just sort of explained, that, making a pie yourself and then sharing it with others and bringing them joy is a way to make you happy. And so if everybody would just make more pie, the world would be a lot better place. People would be happier. They'd be sharing love. They would be giving of themselves to make somebody else feel better. And what a great reward that is, the win-win. So that's the TEDx talk. It's a little bit covers my life story, or my story with Marcus anyway, of experiencing the grief, and then how the pie was like I said, that vehicle to help get me back on track.
Well, and listeners will have a link to that in the show notes. And okay. You also, you just mentioned the house for rent. So can you tell us a bit about your time?
Skimmed over that.
Yeah.
But that turned out to be a pivotal point in my life. So I go back to Iowa State Fair. And then afterward, I go visit my birthplace, which is in southeast Iowa. It's called Ottumwa. And Radar O'Reilly from MASH, anybody remember that character? He was from Ottumwa. So that's how people know Ottumwa. And Tom and Roseanne Barsh, they had a diner in Ottumwa. So after I left Ottumwa, I was like, I'm never going to be back in Iowa again. It was nice to visit. But then I made it just a few miles down the road and I saw a sign for the American Gothic House. And it's the little white farmhouse that's featured in the Grant Wood painting of the couple that stands there with the pitchfork and these very dour faces. And there's this little white farmhouse with like a church window and under the peaked roof. And it's a real house. And I grew up just a few miles away and I never even knew it was there. And now it's been renovated and shored up. They put in a new foundation and a porch, and they've got a nice visitor center and museum right next door. So I stopped and had my picture taken in front of the house, dressed up in one of the free costumes, like the woman in the painting, and held the pitchfork. And then I was trying to peek in the windows of the house because it was not open to the public. It's been a private residence. It's always been a private residence. And so I was trying to peek in the windows. It was empty. Nobody was living there. And I saw on the timeline that somebody had lived there in the museum timeline. Somebody had lived there as recently as 2 years prior. And so then I was like, I wonder if it's for rent. And it was just so cute. It's like a little white cottage and this just charming, small, but like a dollhouse. I can't even tell you how cute it was. It was love at first sight. And then I just had this feeling like when I learned that it actually was for rent, that just changed everything. I was like, I think I'm going to stay here. And then I did. And I thought, well, maybe just for 3 months, maybe I can just rent this on a very short-term thing. And this will be a nice, quiet place because I'm still trying to get my life back together, grieving. I ended up staying 4 years. And the town is Eldon, Iowa, and the population is 900.
Oh, my gosh.
And I had been living in Europe. I'd been living in Seattle, Portland, Los Angeles. I mean, this was so completely out of my normal range of existence that no one could believe it. First of all, that I was going to move there, and secondly, that I would actually stay there. And then I did end up staying. And then I started selling pie out of the house because I was talking to you about this pie journey through, grief and how making pie helped me. And I thought, well, what am I going to do in this little town of 900? Maybe I'll just make some pie and sell it out in the side yard, do a little pie stand for a weekend business. And I did that, but then it just kept growing and growing, and it became this monster 100 pies a weekend. And it wasn't just a weekend business, it was all consuming. And so, this is like the thing about Germany. What would you tell your 40-year-old self? If you knew what you were getting yourself into, how would you prepare? And somebody would tell me, what would I tell my 47-year-old self, moving into the American Gothic House? It's that pie thing just took off, and it became so unmanageable, and it actually became very stressful. And then I didn't have privacy any longer, and I sort of ruined it for myself. But yeah, so I moved out after 4 years and had a good run of it, and now I'm still known as the Pie Lady, which I'm sort of trying to shake that persona, because it really is just a persona. I mean, everybody should just be making their own pie. There should not be one pie lady or 20 pie ladies. Everyone should be making pie. So yeah, so that's my American Gothic House chapter of my life. It was living in a tourist attraction.
Yeah, what a shift from...
Right?
Yeah.
I would look out the window. It wasn't lonely. I mean, I could just look out the window and all day long see people standing out in front posing with a pitchfork and getting their picture taken. So it was nice to live in a place where you were not actually cut off from the world, because rural Iowa can be very, very, very quiet. But that house always had like a sort of river of people passing by, which was nice. And people from all over the world would stop by. So I got to meet a lot of people. I sold them pie, but I also could engage in conversations with all different kinds of people right here in southern Iowa. So that was a pretty cool experience. And the house was so cute. And I slept right behind the Gothic window, which not many people can say they could do that. And then when I moved out, they stopped renting it out as a private residence. Now it is actually open to the public to walk through.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I ruined it for everybody, for any future tenants anyway. I sure do miss it, but it was probably left, and just I couldn't stay any longer. Sometimes it's like the Germany thing. You just have to know when it's okay for you to call it quits or make a change. I wouldn't say quitting is the word. It's that sounds like defeat, but take care of yourself. Know what's right for you, and don't listen to everybody else, saying you should do this or you should stay or you should go or what you should never move in the first place. But listen to your own voice and know what's right for you.
So Beth, okay, you've written 3 books now, and 4, right? Because you've got the other one with a publisher. So can you tell us a little bit about your writing practice? I mean, we met, right, at a Taos writing retreat last year, and I would just love to hear kind of what your experience is with the writing process.
Well, I think I have a great advantage in that I don't have the financial pressure to have a full-time job. I can just sit and write at my desk all day if I choose. One of the things I always tell people when they say they want to be a writer, I go, well, pare down, get your expenses way down, take the financial pressure off yourself so that you can focus on the writing. But I don't really have a practice per se. It's like I like diving into a project, and then I know myself. I do really well in like a 3-month project time span. I give it my all for 3 months, but after 3 months, I want to be done with it. So my writing process kind of goes in phases like that, I would say in seasonal almost. So I'll, pour myself into something more than full time, and then I'm done with it. And then I have to take a break and look around and go do other things and ride my bike and travel a little bit, and then get going on the next one. So it sort of runs in cycles like that for me. I don't believe that you have to sit down and write every single day and have this like crazy rigid discipline that, you have to write between this hour and this. I mean, maybe if your time is really limited and you're trying to write something while also juggling raising children or having a full-time job. Yes. Okay. So then maybe you do have to find a little bit more discipline, but it takes discipline no matter what. I mean, you have to keep your butt in the chair in order to finish the project. But my thing is like, okay, what's the project and how bad do I want to do this? And then once I get into it, I love the process. I love showing up at my desk every day. I rarely get dressed. I just work. I get up, make my coffee, and then I am in my pajamas at my desk. And don't bother me. Like my boyfriend comes in for lunch or he'll want to come and sit and chat with me. And I'm like, okay, are you going to leave yet? Because I'm in the flow, right? I'm in the zone. Yeah. So that's how I like to do it. Just those are the days that I just don't even get dressed.
And what would you say your kind of best writing advice is? So for listeners who maybe want to write a book or, particularly memoir, because you've done 3 now, what would you say is, maybe your favorite advice to share to aspiring writers?
Well, I'm going to go back to where we met, Jen Loudon's writing workshop. I went to that at a very low point where, I had this American Gothic House story I wanted to tell, and I just couldn't seem to get it finished. I couldn't get it down. And then I was filled with self-doubt. And that's the part that I think is the biggest obstacle to almost every single writer out there. And that's the advice I would give is just, get rid of the self-doubt, get rid of that editor and that critic that sits on your shoulder, just stop worrying about what other people think. And one of the best takeaways I got from that workshop was I was whining about my book that wasn't getting finished. Like, and why is anyone going to want to read this book? That's the big self-doubt thing. And Jen Loudon said to me, because you're going to write it in a way that makes it interesting for people to read. And that was like the aha moment for me, just the smack in the head that I needed. Like, stop being a whiner and just go do it, write it the best you can do it but finish it, like sit in the chair, keep your butt in the chair. I think deciding that you want to do it and you have to want to do it badly enough to finish it, that's where you have to start. So many people tell me they want to write a book, but they're not willing to sit in the chair. And then I give them all this advice, and then they'll come back to me with all these excuses for why they can't. And then I go, okay, well, we're done here because you either want to do it or you don't. That's it. So if you want to do it bad enough, then you'll do whatever it takes to get it done. Sorry, that sounds harsh, but that's just, I think that's important.
Yeah. And that's what's worked for you.
That's what's worked for me.
Yeah.
That, like I said, deciding how bad do I want to do it? I want to do this so bad. I'll do it. One guy that's written like 14 books, he's an adventure travel guy. He gave me some advice once. I asked him, how do you crank out all these books? And he goes, I just turned down dinner invitations for at least like, I don't know if we said 1 month or 3 months or whatever time frame it was. He makes sacrifices to his personal life in order to get this book done. So I thought that was really good. Turn down dinner invitations. Start with that.
Right.
Start with that. Find the time. Make the time for yourself.
Yeah, it makes me think of what you talk about in your book, Hausfrau Honeymoon, of the importance of self-preservation, right? So if we think about that, it's the same thing with our writing, or any creative thing that we want to bring into the world is you got to have a sense of self-preservation, boundaries, saying no, recognizing when it's time to move on. And it may even be time to move on from a project. Maybe you're like, oh, this just isn't quite working. I'm going to start something new.
That's true. And I mean, I walked away from this book for 12 years. In fact, I almost forgot about it. And so that goes to show you. And I think everything has its time, and I'm interested to see what I do next. That's what I'm like, what is the next project, by the way? That's where I'm at right now. I'm like, okay, I have to like catch my breath and look around and decide what's the next thing.
This kind of leads into my last question for you, Beth, which is the name of this podcast is Tranquility du Jour. So we know you live on a farm in Iowa. And so I'm curious, how do you find tranquility in your everyday?
I go outside. I'm just live in nature. I immerse myself in nature, and you don't have to live on a farm to do that. But I would say that my tranquility most definitely comes from being in nature. I'll go for a walk, and I do have the luxury of being in the country, so I can go for a walk on a long stretch of dirt road or around the fields and through the woods. And sometimes we have 3 pet goats. So sometimes I will just go and sit with the goats. If the sun is shining just right on the side of the barn, I'll sit down with my back on the wall and feel the sun on my skin, and the goats will come and sit next to me, and I'll pet them. And that is so calming. And there's a barn cat, and he comes and sits on my lap, and I pet him. And I know that there's science that backs up that, like, being around animals, petting an animal, like, lowers your blood pressure. So I think about that when I'm petting that cat. I go, oh, I'm getting cat hair all over me, but I'm also lowering my blood pressure. So I guess that makes up for it. So yeah, nature, just being in nature and just really looking at the stars at night, like, that really helps also. Just puts everything in life in perspective. Like, we're just little specks of dust. So that calms me down and go, hey, don't worry about everything so much. Look, there's this huge, huge universe out there. And the fact that I can see so many stars out here in the country, that really makes me feel close to whatever spirit, God, whatever, higher power. It's a spiritual thing to be out here.
Beautifully said. And I think it's a wonderful reminder of not just nature therapy, but also pet therapy. So thank you, Beth.
Thank you so much for having me.
Here's what regular retreater Courtney had to say about her Costa Rica experience. This retreat is magical. It's the perfect blend of movement, creativity, and utter relaxation. Kimberly's yoga practice combines asana and breathwork in ways that have left me relaxed and energized at the same time. Even better, the creativity sessions have helped unlock my right side brain, which has been used very little during my legal career, opening up a whole new world to me and giving me the courage to explore my artistic side on my own. In short, the changes I've experienced on my retreats with Kimberly have led to a life-altering adjustment in my career and family relationships. In addition, Pura Vida is a beautiful resort with caring staff and experienced practitioners who offer a wide range of bodywork options. But maybe my favorite retreat activity has been resting in a hammock between classes and treatments, listening to the birds, and catching up on the latest bestseller with a smoothie or a glass of white wine. You can learn more at KimberlyWilson.com/Costa Rica. Savvy sources. You can find Beth at BethMHoward.com. Her books are all available at BethMHoward.com/books. On Facebook at The World Needs More Pie, and on Instagram at The World Needs More Pie. I've also included a link to her TED Talk, The Healing Power of Pie. Social media. So a reminder, you can find me over on Instagram, Pinterest, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. I hope to be doing more videos in 2019. I've just started doing a few Instagram stories, which are super fun. Not sure I fully get it, but I'm working on that. So those of you who have been watching them over the past week, thank you. And hopefully they will continue to grow and improve. And also, Tranquility, my locally sewn clothing line, we have a brand new color for spring, and I'll be announcing that shortly. And we recently got in more of the dark, deep blue, which is called Cobalt. So it's a really yummy, deep blue. And you can find more information on this at tranquility.com, and it's tranquility without a Y. Also, there's a link to my 5 books, and would be so grateful again if you took a moment to write a review and or let me know how and if they've had effect on you. Also, Tranquility Filled e-courses. These are going to be shifting and changing in 2019. So if you're interested in any of these, you can find them in the link in the show notes and at KimberlyWilson.com. Also, a reminder, we have an app for Tranquility du Jour. You can get it for your iPhone and Android. It's only $1.99, and there's a link directly to that in the show notes, and then, of course, over at KimberlyWilson.com. And then finally, read about my passion for animals. Obsessed. I want 20 more pugs. We just celebrated the 1-year anniversary of adopting Gizmo, the 10, who I guess is now 11. I mean, because 10 plus 1 equals 11. I'm great with math. And we just celebrated his 1-year anniversary of Gotcha Day, of having him. And my gosh, I tell you, I can't imagine life without Gizmo. He's the most amazing dog ever. Little ornery, but super amazing. And again, thank you so much for being here. As always, I hope you have a delightful week ahead as we launch into the holidays. And if you have a moment to pen a review on iTunes, would be so grateful. And or let me know how and if this podcast is affecting you in some positive way. It's always so helpful to hear. Okay, happy holidays and more to come next week. Namaste.